Hi, everybody. We're here with Aaron Moss, who's going to teach us how to set up experiments on cloud research. Take it away, Aaron.
Okay, thanks. So once you log into Cloud Research, you'll come to a dashboard that looks like this, and any studies that you have live or that you've set up recently will show up here on the dashboard. You can see there's a bunch of information here about the project, survey ID. Here's a progress bar. The study hasn't been launched. You can see a breakdown of the cost, a number of different actions you can take. There's just a lot of information about your studies here on the dashboard. And if you click anywhere on this, you get a drop down, and there's a number of other details about your study that are helpful, sometimes when they're live or they're running, or even when you're just setting up. So you can click on this link to go to the external link, which would be your Qualtrics survey or Survey Gizmo, whatever you're using. You can see what that kind of preview that. You can see what the hit would look like to workers on Mechanical Turk by clicking on the Cloud Research preview. And if this study were live, you would see details here about how many people are active, how many people have been approved or rejected, how long it's taking people, just a number of different things that are helpful to kind of monitor, especially things like how long it's taking people to complete. If that's wildly different than what you expected, you might want to pause the study and make an adjustment to the pay or something. But this is the basic dashboard. If you wanted to set up a study, you would go to create a study, and you can choose from the Mechanical Turk toolkit or our Prime Panels platform. I think often people will be interested in using Mechanical Turk, so this would be a study that's launched to participants on Mechanical Turk. Once you start the study setup process, there are a number of tabs, and the reason that there's so many tabs here is that this is really set up to follow the way you would set up a hit on Mechanical Turk. So the toolkit is really built to make Mechanical Turk more user-friendly, to give researchers more functionality. But because a lot of users are first familiar with Mechanical Turk before switching to cloud research, this kind of follows the same setup procedure. So the first panel or tab is demographic options or panel options. And you can choose how many people you want to be a part of your survey. So if you want to sample, let's say 350 participants, then we have a very long list of demographic criteria that you can use. And as you make selections with your demographic criteria, you will see estimates here on our feasibility calculator. The feasibility calculator tells you two things that are important. First, it tells you whether or not it's probable or feasible to sample the number of people that you're trying to. So a demonstration of that is there's not a lot of, not a huge number of older adults on Mechanical Turk. So if I chose that I wanted to sample people just say 60 and older, and I wanted 350, I get a warning here that says you may not be able to reach that number of people. And you might, if you want to make sure, you might contact us. So the feasibility calculator will warn you if it thinks that we don't have enough people qualified to actually fill how many you want to sample. The second thing the feasibility calculator tells you is how much of a demographic charge there would be to reach those people. And so you see there's a panel charge here. And because older adults are more difficult than other groups to sample on Mechanical Turk, you can see there's a charge of 71 cents per person. And this is in addition to the compensation that you pay people. So this is like an additional demographic targeting fee. So the feasibility calculator tells you how likely it is that there's enough people to actually complete your study, and then how much it costs to target those people. And so we have a very long list of demographics. You could look through the list, and if you ever have a qualification here that you say, oh, I really want to find people who meet some criteria that isn't listed here, you could let us know. So you could suggest a demographic criteria or a question, and we can quickly sample thousands of people within a matter of days and then make that those people who qualify available to you. So if you don't see something that you're interested in, a criteria that's important, you could let us know, and we can sample people and find people who meet your criteria. So once you finish making any demographic criteria, or if you're not interested in that for your study, you can move on to the next tab. And these next couple of tabs are really just giving some basic information about your study. And these are, again, things that are specific to Mechanical Turk. So you could give a name to your project. You can see here that the project name is not displayed to workers. So this is something that makes sense to you and the members of your lab. You can enter email addresses that should be notified when the HIT is launched and when it completes. So this might be the lab PI, a postdoc, or any graduate student or lab manager, whoever's kind of running that study, that you want them to know when it's starting and completing. And then this customer name field, it should really say researcher name. A number of labs often use, a number of people within the same lab use the same account. And so you could, if you want to keep track of whose study is whose, you can enter a researcher name here. On the next tab, you give your study a title, and this title is visible to participants on Mechanical Turk. So we recommend often giving it a vague title, right? To avoid self-selection bias, you might say psychology survey or psychology study. This is visible to the participants. Next, if you want to give people a brief description of what they'll do, so if this is just a basic survey answering questions, you might say this is a psychology survey. This custom instructions field is important. If you have specific things that are part of your study, like people need to download Inquisit software and complete a reaction time task, anything that kind of goes out of the norm of just filling out basic survey questions, you would want to let people know here. And especially if it requires some kind of download, or perhaps you want them to complete like a more complex study, or it's longitudinal, anything that you would want people, that might cause people to get into the study and then decide, oh, you know what, I actually don't want to do this. You want to give them the information up front, and this is the place to do that. If you need to warn people about any potentially explicit or offensive content, you could do that here. You could add some keywords. Sometimes people search for tasks on Mechanical Turk using keywords. That's not the primary way people look for tasks, but again, these are Mechanical Turk sort of features that have been borrowed from the study setup there. All right, so on the fourth tab here, you can decide how much the study is going to pay. I'll mention just as a reference that we recommend kind of a minimum payment of 10 cents per minute for studies that are just kind of filling out surveys and questionnaires. And then we recommend that the price go up from there. So if your study is really long, if your study requires a lot of engagement from people, if it requires downloading something for a reaction time task, we recommend paying, above 10 cents a minute. But 10 cents a minute is really kind of like the baseline for just filling out simple surveys. So I'm just going to fill in, let's say $1.50 per task. Next, you can tell people how long you expect the survey or study to take. I'm just going to fill in 10 minutes here. You can change this to hours if it's going to last several hours, but you tell people how long you expect it to take. And then in the next field, you enter how long you actually want to give people. And sometimes researchers think it doesn't really matter to me when people complete this, as long as they do it within 5 hours, 12 hours, maybe a day. But we recommend that you set this field, how much time you're going to give people to actually get it done, to be about 3 to 4 times the length that you expect the study to take. And we recommend that because sometimes people will accept lots of different hits and then they'll just hold on to them and complete them in order. And if you give someone 15 hours or 24 hours to get this hit done, there are some people who will hold on to it for that amount of time, right? They'll go away, they'll do other things, and that can just slow down your data collection. If eventually they make a mistake and they hold on to it and it expires, they have to then return the hit before someone else can take it. So just to avoid some of the complications that can slow down data collection, we recommend limiting this to about 3 to 4 times the amount of the length that you expect the study to actually take people. This field is something that you can use if you want your hit to only be visible for so long on Mechanical Turk. So if you set this to 7 days, after 7 days, regardless of whether or not you've sampled all the people that you intended, the hit would disappear from Mechanical Turk. It would close, so it would no longer be visible to people. It's default at 30 days, and if it's just a basic survey, this is almost never used. And again, these are fields that are carried over from Mechanical Turk, where people sometimes set up studies with different aims. So next, if you are linking a survey, you can put the URL in here. This would be like a Qualtrics link, a Survey Gizmo link, whatever survey platform that you're using. You can insert the link there. And if you want to preview it, you can preview it. If you are using Qualtrics, we recommend that you set up embedded data in order to automatically capture people's worker ID and some other information, the assignment ID and hit ID. This is pretty easy to do. We have a little PDF here that would walk you through the steps, but as people click on the link to your survey and leave Mechanical Turk and enter Qualtrics, we add these 3 parameters, worker ID, assignment ID, and hit ID, to the end of their URL up here. And then once they enter into Qualtrics, it's automatically recorded and it's added to your CSV download when you download that data from Qualtrics. It's essential for longitudinal studies. So if you want to match up people's data to their worker ID, you have to have this or some kind of other identifier. And in most cases, it's just a useful thing to have, that if there's someone whose data is particularly bad, you wouldn't want them in a future study, you can exclude them by using their worker ID. Or if you just want to be able to match up people's responses to the data in your Qualtrics file, you need the worker ID. So we recommend setting this up. There are other ways to do this in Survey Gizmo and other platforms. Most of them have an option to capture embedded data. You can also turn this off if you want. There's an option for that. And then you get into some features that are unique to setting up and launching studies on cloud research. So if you wanted to set up a study and have it go live at some time when you're not going to be available to launch it, you could schedule a launch time for your study. This is a useful feature sometimes for like daily diary studies. If you want to set them up in advance and have it automatically launch, and you don't have to have an RA or someone be available to manually launch your studies, you can use this. This is in universal time, so it requires an adjustment to your local time zone, but this is a useful feature for a number of different studies. Sometimes, depending on different types of studies and tasks that people run, sometimes people want to set it up where everyone who completes the study gets an automatic bonus. If you're running that kind of study, you can set that up here. I think it tends to be used less often than actually used, but sometimes people have a different payment structure where they want to make sure that everyone who completes some interactive task gets a bonus. So they'll set that up here. The bottom 3 fields here are pretty important. So first of all, one of the most useful pieces of information to participants when they're looking for which surveys or tasks to take is how much those tasks pay. And if you want to display the median hourly pay rate to participants, you can do that just by clicking this box. So that'll take however much you're paying and how long it's taking people to complete it, the median time, and it'll display that information to workers. So the way that we profile people on demographic questions is that we add a couple of questions to the hit acceptance window on Mechanical Turk. I'm actually going to navigate back here a step or two just to see if it will allow me to show that. Oh, I'll come back to that at the end. But we add a couple of hits that are not a part of your survey. They're a part of the window on Mechanical Turk, and they're optional for the workers to complete, and they're also optional for you to display. But this is how we profile people. So I mentioned that if you have a qualification that you don't see on our website, we can quickly sample several thousand people within a matter of days and find people who meet that criteria, this is how we do that. And again, it's optional on both the researcher and the participant end. Right, so the fifth tab is a pretty important one. This determines what kind of completion code you're going to use for your study. So on Mechanical Turk, researchers place a completion code at the end of the study, and then participants take that code and enter it in when they submit the hit on Mechanical Turk. And this just displays to the researcher that the participant went all the way through the study. There are a number of options here. Often the best, kind of most convenient and easiest one is to use a dynamic completion code. And this often works best if you're using Qualtrics, which I realize not everyone does, but many universities have a Qualtrics license. So if you do and you want to use this dynamic code, there's some instructions here for how to set that up. But what the dynamic code does is it ensures that each participant gets a unique and randomly generated completion code. And then because it's integrated with Qualtrics and our system is able to read what the code should be and what the participant actually enters. And so it makes it easier for you to kind of check those at the end. And all the ones that match, they have this nice big green check mark. All the ones that don't match, they have a big red X. So it makes it easy to kind of search through and approve, like, did this person actually find the correct completion code and enter it. Again, this one is integrated with Qualtrics. If you have kind of your own random code generator, you would want to select custom completion code. And then there's also an option for a very basic completion code, which is just static. So everyone would receive the same code. And you could use that option if you wanted. So once you decide what kind of completion code you want to use, there's a feature here. Sometimes you have to, after participants submit their assignments, you have to go through and approve them or reject them. And there's an option here you can use to make sure that you don't forget to actually pay people or to approve them. And so you could adjust this however you want, but if you had this set to 30 days and some researcher in your lab forgot to actually approve or reject assignments after 30 days, they would all be automatically approved and people would be paid. Most of the time, researchers get to the point of approving and rejecting assignments before that, but it's just kind of like a backup that if you forget, people still get approved. Okay, so the last three tabs here are really all things that are pretty unique to cloud research, and they all the features on this page, the worker requirements, make it very easy to determine who's eligible for your study and who's not, and eligibility kind of based on including or excluding people. So let's say you ran one study, right, and you sampled 50 people, and you're running another study on the same topic or the same question, and you don't want those 50 people in there. There's two ways you can go about excluding them. You can click on this option to just find the name of that study and add it here, so anyone who completed that study would no longer be eligible. The second way is that you could use individual worker IDs. So if you recorded the worker IDs, you could just paste a list of them here. You can add multiple studies to the exclusion criteria, but there's two options there. The super exclude feature, we have a knowledge base article about that, but very simply, it takes anyone who even started your study. So there might be a case where someone accepts your hit, they start your survey, they get about halfway through, and then for whatever reason, they drop out. So if you really want to make sure that the people who are participating in your study have never seen it before, you can use the super exclude feature. And that would, anyone who even accepted one of your past hits, whereas the other exclude features work on anyone who was approved for one of your past studies. So very similar to the way that you can use the survey ID or a list of worker IDs to decide who's not eligible, you can use that to determine who you want to include. So if you ran a study with 100 workers, 100 participants, and you wanted to follow up with that same group of people, so it's a longitudinal study, you can determine that here just by setting whatever that past study was. And when you place participants onto an include list, those are the only people eligible for this study, so there's no need to set any other criteria. Sometimes people like to use location restrictions or the Mechanical Turk qualifications of a 95% approval rating and at least 100 hits. All those things just kind of tend to get in the way. If anything changes, they might block someone who you actually want to follow up with from being able to accept the study. So when you include people, those are actually the only people eligible to take the study, and there's really no need to add anything else to the study. So our system is set up to be default to use only participants who are located in the United States. You can change that if you want to sample people outside of the United States. There's Mechanical Turk is people are primarily based in the United States. Again, I mentioned that Mechanical Turk has a reputation system. That reputation system is an approval rating and then the number of hits that people have actually taken. So if you want to move this up to get people who have a high approval rating, you would scroll this up and it actually gets narrower. So a common cutoff is that people say, I want only participants who have a 95% approval rating or higher. And then you can also toggle this up and down. And these numbers of 500,000, 100,000 hits, those come from Mechanical Turk. And I know those numbers sound pretty astronomical. And it is true that the more hits someone has completed, the more surveys they have taken. But people do more on Mechanical Turk than just take surveys, right? People can complete image transcription. They can complete really small tasks for like computer scientists, and you can really rack up tasks pretty quickly. So 500,000 hits doesn't mean someone's taken 500,000 psychology surveys. We have a paper, all kinds of details we can share about how to use this and kind of background information for anyone who's interested in that. But this is how you go about setting that when you're actually setting up a study. I'm going to kind of skip over these details. These are, again, things that we have knowledge base articles or be happy to talk with people about in a little bit more detail. The naivete feature is a way to make sure you're sampling inexperienced people, so people who might be new to Mechanical Turk, have less experience with studies. And there's other ways to kind of sample that group of people too. But these last two things here are something that I would recommend leaving on for all studies. So there's a number of participants outside of the United States who have been using VPN and other tools to kind of hide their location, make it look like they're in the United States. And what this list does, having this on, is take places where we've identified as server farms where people are kind of like patching in their connection, and it blocks them. So this would take care of some of the issues of people outside of the United States taking surveys, and there's some English comprehension issues. There's sometimes some data quality issues. So I would just recommend leaving that on. And then this universal exclude list is more of a personal thing that each research lab can use. So a lot of times university IRBs won't allow researchers to reject submissions from workers on Mechanical Turk. So if you have people who get into your study and provide bad data quality, and you think that's someone who I would really prefer is not in any of my future surveys, you can add them to your own universal exclude list. And then when you have this checked, anyone on that list is then ineligible for your study. So these are often, these are on by default, but these are often something good to kind of make sure you're using. Okay, so the next tab is something called microbatch. I don't know how much familiarity everyone has with the pricing structure of Mechanical Turk, but several years ago, Mechanical Turk introduced this kind of odd policy where any hit or assignment that has more than allows more than 9 people to take it, they charge a 40% fee for. Anything under 9, they charge a 20% fee. So if you microbatch your study, we'll take however many participants you're aiming to get, and we'll divide it by 9, and then create that number of hits to make sure that you're only paying a 20% fee. Micro batching has a few other features that if you wanted to kind of slow down your data collection to extend it throughout a day or multiple days, you could use micro batch to kind of control when new hits get released. There's some more details if anyone is interested in using that. I'd be happy to talk more about that. But the kind of another similar option to micro batch is something here on the next page called hyper batch. Hyper batch does the same thing in terms of batching your study into multiple hits of 9 assignments or less so that you're only paying a 20% fee. The difference between micro batch and hyper batch is that micro batch opens up one hit at a time. It's sequential. So a hit is opened, 9 people can take it, and those 9 people have to fill up that hit and complete it before the next hit's released. And so you get this sequential process. Hyper batch releases all your batches at the same time, and you might have 3 people working on the first hit, 9 people have already completed the 5th hit, and they just kind of fill up simultaneously. So hyper batch is often a faster way, but there are reasons you might want to control the pace of data collection, and that just gives you that option. I would always recommend having one of these on so that you're only paying 20% to Mechanical Turk instead of 40%. So this last page has some other pro features, and under the agreement that we've worked out with the department is paying like a licensing fee basically for this up front. And so you can use any of these pro features and there's no like additional cost. Often there's just a flat 5% of whatever you pay people to use these pro features, but you can use as many or as little as you want. It's often the same, but in the case for everyone at UC Riverside, we have this issue where there's going to be no cost for you to use these because of the license. So there's things you can use like blocking duplicate IP addresses, making sure that each person who takes your study is coming from a unique IP address. You can do something similar with geolocations. Geolocations are kind of a messy thing. They're not like GPS coordinates. We have a blog that kind of explains this, but if you want to kind of just make sure that people are more dispersed throughout the United States, you could use the geolocations. Something that a lot of people like to use is you can anonymize people's worker IDs. So Mechanical Turk gives each participant a worker ID. Several years ago, there was some concern that those were not fully anonymous, that you could identify people using those. I think Mechanical Turk has closed that loop. So the worker ID was sometimes linked to people's like Amazon profile, shopping profile, their stuff. From what I've been told is Amazon has since closed that loop. So everyone gets like something separate from their Amazon account. But nevertheless, if you wanted to give people kind of another layer of privacy, you can use what we call a cloud research ID. So we take people's Amazon ID and kind of encrypt it or give it a shell, and they get a cloud research ID that can be used exactly the same as their MTurk ID. It just has, it's been encrypted. Again, there's some other options to like verify the country and state location using people's IP address. You can target people in certain regions of the country if you want to. And there's an option to use a survey group, which isn't often, it's kind of a specific purpose that people might have for that. And again, we have knowledge base articles, blogs, things that I think we could direct people to if they're interested in that. So once you work through these different settings and get to the end, you can decide to save your hit. When you save it, it will then appear on the dashboard. So I didn't complete all the criteria there, so it's not going to actually save. But once you do save a study, it'll bring you back to this page, and you'll see the details of your study set up, ready to go. If you have your account funded, you can launch it. If you decide that you want to edit something in the study, you can do that. And something that's sometimes useful is if you just wanted to take a quick preview to go back over everything that you just did, you can click on this See Survey Specs, and it's going to open up all the pages that you just saw in one web browser. So you can look over all the details again without actually having to navigate through all of them. And then I said I would return to this. I just want to quickly show what the, hopefully this works. Yeah, so I mentioned the demographic questions that we ask people and the system that we use for that. So this is what a hit page would look like on Mechanical Turk. If someone has accepted your hit, they'll see a page like this with your title up here. This is the instructions. And again, they have to click on a link here to view those custom instructions. And then you can see here we add the demographic questions. And these are optional. People can completely ignore them. They can go straight to your survey. But if people do choose to fill these out, these are randomly generated and they rotate. So they're not the same. They don't have anything to do with your study. But if you're concerned in some way that these demographic questions might bias people before they take your study or something, you can choose to take those off. But I just wanted to show what that actually looks like to a participant. So that is kind of the basic process of setting up a Mechanical Turk toolkit study. I'm happy to go over the Prime Panels one. But if there's any questions about MTurk, I'm happy to answer a few if you have them.
That's terrific, Aaron. I think it was very, very clear. And the faculty in the department can get hold of you directly if they have questions. I think you are officially the consultant of the department when it comes to these things.
Yeah, right? Yeah. I would be happy to answer any questions. Depending on what it is, I might direct it to someone else on our team, but I'm certainly happy to be the point of contact for answering questions, especially like I'm sure people have questions as they start to really dig into some of these things and they're like, I want to use it this way. Can I do that? So I'm sure questions will come up. I'm happy to do that. And, I'll keep mentioning it because it's a handy way and a quick way to find out the details about a lot of things. We have a knowledge base that really goes through a lot of these things. You can kind of search for, what is microbatch? How do I include workers? And we have little articles that explain that sort of stuff. And then we have a number of blogs that really explain like some of the best practices for running studies on Mechanical Turk, a lot of tips for navigating the dashboard. I don't want to take up time to go into all of them, but each survey has an ID. You can use tags. So like if you have RAs and stuff managing your studies, there's a lot of ways you can search for them by tag or ID. Just managing studies here on the dashboard. Once you start running a lot, you could have a lot here. So you can archive studies. There's a lot of things that just kind of clean up and make the dashboard easier to use. So I'll go over Prime Panel studies real quick. It's much shorter. There's a lot fewer options. And would you like me to say something about the difference between these two, or do you think most people in the department are aware of the difference between Mechanical Turk and Prime Panels?
No, I think they're probably not. So if you could just say a few words about the difference, that would be great.
So Mechanical Turk is a platform it's an opt-in platform. It, as I mentioned a minute ago, it wasn't really designed for social science research. People do lots of different kinds of tasks there, but social scientists found it easy to use, and so we kind of co-opted it. Mechanical Turk has about 85 to 90,000 people within the United States who complete studies each year, and there's turnover. There's different things about that, but Prime Panels is a completely separate participant platform, and it's something that's much more common in the market research industry. So one reason that academics found Mechanical Turk very useful is that it was more affordable, and it often had some advantages in terms of being able to work on things yourself, kind of control the study settings. Market research and industry, there's a lot of companies that are interested in performing behavioral research, and so market research panels often tend to be a lot bigger. Prime Panels has tens of millions of people within the United States, and it has 50 million people globally. So that size allows you to do much more complex demographic targeting. You can sample people within specific US zip codes. You can sample internationally. You can gather, studies of, you could quickly gather 5,000 people, whereas it might take a little bit longer to do that. So we have a paper that I'd be happy to share that really goes into kind of describing these different platforms, comparing data quality, demographics, and then naivete, or how familiar people are with different study materials. And we really see it, we're not the ones to coin this, but you really want to find participants who are kind of fit for the purpose of your study. And there are a lot of differences between Mechanical Turk and Prime Panels in terms of finding people who are fit for the purpose. But our Prime Panels platform is similar to a number of other platforms that are out there in industry right now. So if you went to Qualtrics and asked them to run a study for you, they would use Qualtrics panels. A number of people are starting to use Lucid, which is another industry platform. Our Prime Panels platform is very similar, except for people might be moving this way, but we have a self-service system here that allows you to set up pretty simple studies and to run them. If you have a lot of Prime Panels uses language that is less familiar to psychologists and more common to industry. So they talk about incidence rate. And if you are targeting participants who are not very common in the population, right, it's a low incidence rate. And so if you're just trying to sample people who are hard to find, it might require our help, and we would run that through our managed research. But kind of very basic demographics or large samples you can set up on your own here and run on Prime Panels. So you can see here that the study setup is much more simple. It's 3 tabs. And again, this is because there's a lot of differences between Mechanical Turk and kind of purpose and what you can get people to do and in Prime Panels. So again, we have a feasibility calculator on the right-hand side, which tells you how much the study will cost. Prime Panels is much more suited for shorter studies. We could run things that are longer than 20 minutes, but really, like, you start to kind of run into some limitations there at 20 or 30 minutes, and that's just differences in who the people are and their motivation for being there. If researchers are more interested in kind of talking about Prime Panels and what they can actually get people to do, be happy to have that conversation. But you can see that price is really determined by how long the study is and who it is you're sampling. And so the how difficult or easy it is to find those people determines the price. And you have our feasibility calculator over here. So right now it's set up for 50 participants, a 10-minute study. The price would be $62.50. And for like a short 10-minute study with just basic general sample, the price is pretty comparable on both Mechanical Turk and Prime Panels once you figure in like the Amazon fees. So we have, again, I mentioned a basic set of demographics here. More advanced demographics, you might have to contact us for a quote, but there's a list here, and you can sample people on these things if you're interested. So the second page is you can adjust the number of participants, have a project and a title, kind of similar to Mechanical Turk, an area for you to insert the link to your survey. Again, an option to schedule a launch time. Some of this should look familiar. Add email addresses, a researcher name. You can exclude people from past surveys. And then one thing that's pretty unique to Prime Panels is that we make it very easy to set up quotas. So if you want to ensure that you have a 50-50 gender split in your study, or if you want to do something more complex, like set up quotas that match the US Census. So you could just click this to apply a census match template. And then on variables like age, gender, ethnicity, and race, we would have quotas set up that match the US Census. If you wanted to manually set up a quota, you could do that as well by just adding a demographic. Maybe it's gender, and you can just choose and then adjust the numbers here, I think. And then this would ensure that you end up with 25 men and 25 women in your study. So once you go through the settings, you can save the study and it'll take you to the dashboard. You can review everything before you launch it, but a lot of these study options are very similar. And again, you can kind of see the price here. And this will also tell you feasibility in terms of whether or not you can sample that group of people, whether it's like we will find them. So a lot of similarity, just a lot shorter, more streamlined. Any questions about Prime Panels?
I'm just curious, with the quota system, is that something that MTurk can do as well? Can you specify, I want half men, half women?
So I'm not sure how much Mechanical Turk has updated that directly from their end. I'm sure that you can. It's I think I'm not sure exactly where our status is in terms of quotas either on Mechanical Turk, but one thing that makes it a little bit more difficult on Mechanical Turk is that there's if you're setting up a demographic criteria, uh, not every worker fills out those questions on our end. I think a lot of them do because there's a number of high paying hits that are run through cloud research and it allows them to qualify for that. But it would only be like open to people who have filled out those questions. Um, I don't think there actually is the capability to set up quotas as easily on Mechanical Turk. But if you wanted to ensure that you had an even split of like say gender, you could set up two separate hits and just divide it, and that's a pretty easy way to do it. There's often like a workaround or an easy way to ensure that you get a quota that you want.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, that's great. And what, just out of curiosity, would you know very much about the demographics on MTurk? Are there more men than women typically looking for experiments?
Yeah. So we know a lot about the demographics on Mechanical Turk. We actually have like so we have a database that captures or records metadata from studies. And so we actually have a book that's getting ready to come out that has like tons of um, population level demographic information. And there are more women on Mechanical Turk than men,
Hmm.
but men tend to be slightly more active. So men complete something like 50 something percent of hits,
Yeah,
even though women are like 57% of the population. Um, and so, yeah, our database allows us to look at some really interesting stuff to do with demographics, and a lot of it's focused on demographics in the U.S. But we actually have a paper right now too that it's a little, I guess redundant, but we have our database that we've used to kind of report a lot of high-level population stuff, and then we actually gathered what I'm pretty sure is the first random and representative sample of Mechanical Turk workers. So we took the database, randomly sampled people, stratified it, whatever. Um, and in this paper that we have up that I'm happy to share, we report a lot of the basic demographics. And so if you wanted like representative data of race, age, gender, all that sort of stuff, I can easily share that.
great. That's great to know. Okay, I think, is that it then? Is that pretty much the system so people can get started with it? Yeah.
Yeah, I think so.
Great.
And like I said, I'm sure questions will come up, so we're happy to answer them. And let me just show here. So we have our blog and then our knowledge base, and
Great.
those have a lot of helpful
Under
tips too.
resources, right?
Yeah, under resources.
Great. Wonderful. Thank you so much, Aaron. I'm sure folks will be contacting you with questions, but this is a great introduction.
Yeah, thank you for uh, taking the time. I know that it takes a lot of time to sit down and go through that, but I'm happy to share, and I'm happy to answer any questions as you and other researchers get going.